Hi everyone, this is Hot House, and I'm your host Patrick Howard Brunette. Today we're talking with Kathleen McFall and Clark Hays. Their latest novel is Kitchen Heat, published by Pumpjack Press. Kathleen and Clark, welcome.
Hi, Pat.
Hi, Patrick. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for joining. Well, it's great to see you guys. You know, we had such a great time last week at the Portland Book Fest.
This was our second year being there, but I believe it was actually the Book Fest second or third year back since the pandemic. So they were virtual for a couple of years. So this was our second year, and yeah, we had a blast. It was just so wonderful.
Yeah, you guys have, I think, the most interesting and attractive booth with all of your fun games and tchotchkes and whatnot, and it was a real pleasure for me to be able to join you at that table. So thanks.
Sure.
Very happy to have you there.
Yeah. So tell us about your latest book, Kitchen Heat. I really enjoyed reading it. I felt a little steamy as I was reading it, and I actually I wanted to ask you whether it's or how much of it is autobiographical. I think I like to think all of it is, but tell me about the book.
Well, definitely the steamy parts are autobiographical.
Well, we say it's very loosely based on our what you call meet cute. We did actually work in a restaurant called Old Wives' Tales, which was part of a
Sure.
Portland institution years ago.
Sure.
And Rose and Thorn is based on Old Wives' Tales, loosely based on Old Wives' Tales.
Old Wives' Tales, for those who are not familiar with it outside of Portland, was just this amazing place back in the 90s. It was this welcoming, safe space for the LGBTQ community. It was a shelter space for women who are facing issues of domestic violence. It was a health food restaurant way ahead of its time. That sort of focus of safety and community really created this amazing space where it was so powerful to us that we wanted to set our latest book there back in the 90s. And the amazing part is it had this incredible salad bar, which is like this way ahead of its time. And the flagship soup was Hungarian mushroom soup, which was this creamy, artery clogging, just delicious soup that people would line up for. And I was a chef there. I probably cooked 10,000 gallons of it.
Yeah, that's great. I remember the soup. And I remember Old Wives' Tale, and they really had a deliberate mission to support the community and support the women and the LGBTQ community as well. So
it was an amazing space, and we wanted the restaurant to basically be a character in this first book, which is a series that will be set now in the Rose and Thorn from here on out. And I would say, like, just speaking of the book, which we have right here, coincidentally. It's a slow burn romance. It's our first venture into romance books, and we're very pleased with it so far.
yeah, the hero and heroine of the story are very compelling, and I've really found myself rooting for them, and I couldn't help thinking of both of you as I read it, and it even made it more fun.
There certainly are aspects of it that are true. I was a waitress at
Yeah.
Old Wives' Tales many years ago, and Clark was a chef. And it is, in fact, where we met. I was a single mom at the time, and so aspects of that are true as well. But that's kind of where it stops. The rest of it after that is the fictional component of it. We were interested in exploring the ideas about how two people who are really brokenhearted, which I don't think that we really were at the time, how you come together and trust to love again. And it's that, but it's also, as you know from reading it, funny. It has a lot of offbeat characters. It has a lot of subplots going on, and we intended for it to be really fun, but to hit people authentically as well.
Yeah. Well, I think it has a lot of pertinence for today. I mean, as 20-somethings in the 90s, I think every person of that age goes through some kind of transformative, sometimes uncomfortable process. But today, boy, there's so many unknowns. If you're out there trying to find a companion or a date, or you go through the dating scene, I can't imagine today all the complexity out there and uncertainty. It shows how people can actually heal themselves and come together. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to
So,
hit
thank
we
you.
wanted to hit the sort of classic tropes in the romance world. You know, this is a friends to lovers, slow burn, as it's called. But we also wanted to do some pretty significant character exploration, which I think deviates a little bit from some of the more traditional approaches to romance. So we're putting our own spin on
Yeah.
the genre, so to speak.
Yeah. So this is the first of a series.
Yes.
I'm hearing. Yeah, that's
Yes.
great.
We're about
Great.
halfway through the second one.
Oh, congratulations. Good.
Thank
I
you.
can't wait. And this is only the latest of many books you've written. And tell us a little bit about your previous series. I know you've got the Mars Trilogy and the Bonnie and Clyde series and the Cowboy and Vampire series. So tell us a little bit more about that.
It all started with the Cowboy and Vampire.
Which I happen to have right here.
Wow, that's great.
The Cowboy, Clark and I met at Old Wives' Tales. We had not the romance in Kitchen Heat, but we did have a romance, and it was pretty fiery, and we broke up and were apart for a couple of years. Both of us were beginning writers at that time. Clark was a poet. I was still trying to write my first novel unsuccessfully. And we decided that the only way that we were going to try to kind of tame our, honestly, the passion between us was to see if we could write a book together. So if we could write a book together, then we figured that we would have what it took to go the distance. And so we wrote The Cowboy and the Vampire, a very unusual romance. And it was based on bringing together our very different backgrounds. Clark is rural from a cowboy culture. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. So
Vampire culture.
So we have very different backgrounds to begin with, and we created this whole world. We built this world in which a cowboy and a vampire fall in love as sort of a proxy for what we might be able to do together. Obviously not really. I'm not really a vampire, of course, but moving. And so we each wrote a chapter and we mailed them back and forth to each other.
Oh, that's great.
This book came out so long ago. We were literally actually writing things by hand and mailing them in the U.S. post office. Like there was no email at that time. There was, but we were behind the times. So we were literally writing by hand, mailing chapters, editing by hand. And that book, luckily for us, was published traditionally by Llewellyn, which was a small sort of mid-sized publisher in where were they at again?
St. Paul.
St. Paul, yeah. That took kind of a risk on us. They published mostly books in the sort of tarot, witchcraft, Wiccan philosophy kind of area. And they took a chance on Cowboys and Vampires because I thought it was a fun mashup, and it has proven to be a fun and mashup that continues to draw readers, as we saw at the recent book fest.
Yeah. Subsequently, I wrote 3 other books in that series, and it's really kind of a worlds colliding book, which has a lot of metaphysical elements to it. Explores the whole concept of a cowboy, what it means in American culture in a more realistic way, and the mythos of a vampire, and puts a modern spin on it. And there are 3 more books in that series, and it continues to be our strongest seller. Even now, it's the first book in the series is in its 4th printing. And
then you went on to the Bonnie and Clyde series.
Yeah, and I think the thing that is so great about writing together and for so long is you can sort of see this narrative arc that links all of our books, even though they're very different genres and approaches. There's lots of humor in there, but romance and love, the transformative power of love, is sort of at the heart of all of our books. The Bonnie and Clyde series, we gave the infamous outlaws a chance to be rehabilitated. We imagined that instead of being gunned down, they were forced to become government agents to help save democracy and the working class from the powers of greed. But at the heart of that book, just like at the heart of all of our books, is just the power of love to transform the world around you into something better.
That's beautiful. Same is true with your Mars trilogy, I believe, now that you mention it.
Yeah, so that's one in which we took kind of the current world and we imagined.
I forgot.
Comes Clark.
And here it is, by the way.
Imagine what would happen if the vectors in place now succeed and Mars becomes colonized basically by the very wealthy of the Earth. and they move off Earth onto Mars. And so it's what would happen 60, 70 years from now if Mars is a gated community. It's basically that within that context, it's a hard-boiled detective series. Our main character, Crucial Larson, realizes that his sister has gone missing on Mars. She won the work lottery, which means she got to go to Mars to work in a service capacity for the uber wealthy, and she's gone missing. And so he has to go to Mars against his will because he does not like Mars, but he's a detective. He goes to Mars to find his sister. So there's love in this book. There's unrequited love of our main character, but there's also family love, which is what we explore in this particular book. The power of loyalty to your family, what that means, and how that can shape an entire trajectory of someone's life.
Yeah. And he is kind of an earthbound person, even though Earth is, to say the least, dystopian in your series.
Yes, he has grown. He has grown very comfortable in sort of just being in that apathetic dystopia, even though he can't go outside in a day anymore, and poverty is extreme, and the only animals really left on Earth are raccoons and rats and coyotes and mean little woodpeckers that feed on the mushroom cement walls of all the buildings that people are living in. But
yeah,
he's a pretty memorable character.
Yeah. And it gets better.
What, the Earth?
Yes, things get better.
Yeah. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, they get better.
Despite his apathy.
So I'm fascinated by your choice to write as a team. I can't think of another team. I mean, going back to Mutiny on the Bounty that was written by Nordoff and Hall. So is your process still about the same? You just, or does one person write a chapter, the other writes another chapter, or do you each have a say in all of the material? How does that all work now? Now that you have email.
It's all of that. And actually we live together now, so it's a little easier as well. We can talk across the dining room table.
Yell upstairs.
So it's all of that, really. Basically, we conceive of the plot lines. We create a very rough draft, very rough, chapter by chapter. Mm-hmm. And then each of us just takes a chapter, sequentially throughout, working through the first draft. Each of us reads each other's chapter. We always know where the chapter is going to land. That's the key part of the outline, where the chapter ends, so that the person writing the next one knows where to begin things. Mm-hmm. And then we read each other. Then one of us takes the first pass at the full manuscript. The other person takes another pass. I mean, that could go back and forth 3, 4, 5, maybe even more times, until at the end of it, there's one seamless voice. Mm-hmm. And we've edited each other so much that it becomes really almost like it's the dialect of the two people becoming a third writer.
Wow.
It's like how metal gets heated up and smashed together and hammered, and it turns into an alloy. That's basically our writing approach. And I would say that we've been writing together for 25 years now.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So in the earliest days, I would say that we probably were more fluid and open to letting the writing take us where we wanted it to go, or where it wanted to go, I should say, which has its own challenges. Yeah. We also both began working in communications at the same time. So you start to develop an appreciation for guiding that work, which is why I think with each book that we've written together, we've gotten better about plotting it out. There's still room for, things to shift and change as you write, but we plot it out, and we're very disciplined about sitting down and saying, okay, we're just going to write a chapter here. And when you get, like in my day job and Kathleen's day job, when you get paid for strategic writing, you don't worry about the muse coming or anything like that. You get the words on paper, you get where you want to go, and then you go back and edit it. Mm-hmm. And that's where we found our power together, like between the two of us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think with a lot of creative endeavors, there is a sort of a balance between reckless abandon and letting, as you say, the muse take you where it tells you it wants to go, and having some structure and discipline. And it's a delicate balance because you can't have all of one or all of the other. You really have to.
How do you work? I mean, do you outline?
I've started, I wouldn't say outline, because that kind of reminds me of back in high school when we had to outline our essays, but I have a definite plot arc. My first book, I didn't really have an arc. I kind of knew where it wanted to go, but it kind of wrote itself in many ways. Mostly character driven, but now I'm very interested in plotting out an arc where I know that there's a clear beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think that helps the writing. I think it really does. It tames it a little bit. It helps you take away things that don't really contribute to that arc. I mean, you know, we all want to write and we all want to be recognized and express ourselves, but it really should be at with the mission of getting that piece of art or that piece of work done in a coherent way. So to answer your question, no, I don't outline, but I'm thinking a lot more now about structure than I previously did, which is, I think, helpful.
I think, you know, the muse can be fickle, I guess, is what I've come to realize, at least about myself. And the sort of the more rigor you bring to outlining and plotting, it's freeing in a way, because you can focus on parts of the manuscript that are in the future, or you don't have to be as sequential. You're free to sort of you know what the characters are going to be doing at various junctions, and you can work ahead on something if that's where the mood takes you.
Yeah.
I'll also say this: we live pretty close to Forest Park. We spend a lot of time walking in Forest Park, and that's where we often not only come up with the concepts of the books we're going to write, but sort of work through the trouble we're having, or the plot points that we want to resolve before we sit down and do some writing. So we owe a great deal of gratitude to Forest Park.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, you do live in a beautiful part of town, in a beautiful city. So congratulations on that. And I can see how that could be very inspiring. So you guys publish your work through Pumpjack Press, which is also you guys. And I'm very interested in the concept, and I think a lot of our viewers will be interested in the idea of independent publishing and the value of that in the modern environment. So talk a little about how Pumpjack Press came about and how it developed, and maybe talk a little bit about independent publishing and what that means to you and to authors.
Well, you know, as Clark or one of us mentioned earlier in this conversation, our first book was traditionally published. So we had that experience and we understood what was involved with that in terms of, you know, a print run, we had a book tour, we had all of those things associated with a traditionally published book. And we didn't dislike it. It was a good experience. They were a good publisher. But as we began to think more about our long-term writing career and our options and our desires, our creative goals, and we decided that we wanted to take a different path, that we wanted to have more control over what we wrote, how it was edited. We wanted to have more control over the cover designs. We wanted to do all of those things ourselves. And for us, we were fortunate that we had those revelations at a time when the technology and the things, print on demand and other things that supported those goals were beginning to emerge in a very robust, really important way that allowed us to do that. So we just took a leap of faith and we jumped in to what is independent publishing. And since then we've published, well, we were able to get the rights back for the first book from the publisher. And so since then we've published about 10 books. Is that right? Yeah. 10 books.
This is our 11th, yeah.
Through Pumpjack Press. You know, and as you know, it's really taken off since then. And I think in many ways, independent publishing has become a important part of the publishing landscape, period. It allows for new voices to come forward. It allows for the gatekeeper becomes the audience, the readers themselves in terms of what rises to the top and what doesn't. And we've learned a lot along the way. I mean, just so much along the way in these last 10 or 15 years. And in terms of what we hope to do in the future, we hope to continue publishing our own work, which we will do. And we're eager to share our advice and experience with other authors who would like to take this journey. traditional publishing, there's nothing that we're going to diss about it in terms of that avenue for many people, which I know people feel it's sort of like the lottery at this point when you get a publishing contract. But it's a for-profit enterprise. It is a hard-driven, capitalistic, for-profit enterprise. I mean, look at who just bought Simon and Schuster. I think it was. You know, it's a major hedge fund. So it's a different way of you gain entry to that ecosystem in a way that's very different and harder, frankly, than doing it independently. And so we're happy with our trajectory. It's taking off, and as I said, we're eager now at this stage to share that experience with others.
You guys were very generous with your knowledge and expertise with me as I published my first book and created Green Mill Press. And you're absolutely right. There's an amazingly steep learning curve, but I think we are benefited by the technology. You know, we worked with a book designer that was that are located outside of Portland, and it was very easy to communicate back and forth. Book design and getting it into the hands of Ingram Spark and getting it on Amazon. All these things are very, very, I wouldn't say they're necessarily always straightforward, but they're very achievable. And that I don't think was the case 20 or certainly not 30 years ago. Yeah.
I think a key differentiator here, though, and I know that you know this because you went through this yourself with your own publishing journey recently, is quality. I mean, you really have to pay a great deal of attention to quality. Those are the things that a traditional publisher will do your cover, will do your editing, will do the things that that you don't, as the writer yourself, don't do. There's a plus and minus to that. So you have to do it yourself. That gives you more control, but it also you have to be sure that you're paying attention to the quality of the product that you're publishing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and I think a number of eyes on the product is helpful. You know, they used to sometimes they'd refer to these as vanity projects, like, oh, look, I got my book out. But sometimes there's choices that were made that weren't necessarily the greatest choices, like the cover design or the font or, attention to detail with regard to typos and that sort of thing. So you're absolutely right. And it does shift the onus back to the independent creator to make sure of that. Balance with I think, the very positive notion of the democratization of publishing. I think it's part of a whole movement in culture where the seat of power is just more distributive versus consolidated, even though there's a lot of effort to continually consolidate power and control. I think there's a balancing force that's I think successfully tries to distribute that amongst a larger number of people.
For sure. I would say that there's a flip side, though, and you touched on some of it. A publishing house has everything contained inside, right? The design, the editing, the layout, marketing. So that becomes the writer's responsibility in this independent landscape. And with the tools of publishing, straightforward, not easy, as you said, but accessible, millions of people are publishing books right now. And so I think we were just talking this morning, there's maybe somewhere between 1 million and 4 million books coming out every year. And so the dark side of the moon when it comes to independent publishing is you still have to find a way to reach readers. And if readers are in a sea of 4 million other competing voices, it's very hard to get your book to rise to the top, or even just rise near the top so that more people see it. So that's the challenge ahead of independent creators, as you said. It's a good challenge. It's joyful torture.
But I would also counter that I think that challenge exists for all books, not just independently published. I mean, there are many traditionally published books that rarely see more than 1,000 copies sold. So it's a challenge across the board right now. Certainly greater in the indie world, for sure.
Yeah.
With less access to the review structure, media.
Yeah. And I think then it becomes a challenge of, do you write for the market or an audience, or do you write to be true to your voice? And how do you do both? I mean, I think there's value in getting your work, in front of people's eyes, but if you tilt more and more in that direction, then who are you really? Are you just creating product, or are you expressing yourself? Your true voice. So it's a challenge.
I think that's that's it in a nutshell right there. How do you sort of balance the desire to be an artist and a writer and someone who writes, according to your vision for the world and your books?
Yeah.
Or is it targeting people who you think might be more inclined to read your books? In which case, your voice has to go through that filter.
Yeah.
And I'll say, just for the record, I think publishing houses have deeper pockets, right? So in order for independent creators to do the work, you have to fund some of it yourself, and the returns aren't always immediate. And so I know the term privilege gets used a lot, but there's an economic privilege to many people who write, because if you don't have deep enough pockets, you may not be able to take advantage of some of the sources that are going to get your work in front of readers.
Yeah. And I think that what Clark is saying is part of what one of the messages we'd like to get out, and Pat, through this podcast, can hope to do that, is we are available and interested in helping other people, and to share our experience and expertise to anyone who writes to us through the website, or we'd really be pleased to do so.
Well, that's great.
I'm sure, Pat, as you have experienced, there's lots of places that will tell you for a fee they can make sure that your book gets reviewed, or in these great marketing things that
every day
may or may not be successful. And so if you don't have the money to spend on that kind of stuff, it can seem quite daunting, even if you have the greatest work and the greatest writing style and a great cover design and all those sorts of things. It can still be pretty daunting, but it's worth it. It's definitely worth it.
And, over time with things, as I said, this, you build out an ecosystem where writers are helping writers, while we're empowering, local copy editors, local artists. We're creating a world in which we're all working together toward a creative end.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully stated. And it really is a community. And it's becoming more and more supportive within that community. Even some philanthropic groups and libraries and other institutional entities are supporting it, just as you point out, the people whose voices may not be heard and may not have the means to take that creative step. So that's very timely and generous of you guys. So if people want to learn more about Pumpjack Press, how would they do that?
They would visit our website at pumpjackpress.com.
So the titles are listed there. We have a page about that shows you how to get in touch with us. Our social platforms are there as well. So yes, it's a one-stop shopping at Pumpjack Press, including a store. And we're very chatty, so feel free to write, ask about anything.
Well, Kathleen and Clark, it's been amazing talking with you, and I want to congratulate you once again on your latest publication, Kitchen Heat, available at Pumpjack Press and Amazon and other book vendors,
where all books are sold. And I'll put a plug in here, because I think when we talk about the community of writers, that we can all really help each other by when you purchase a book, not just ours or Pat's. Leave a review. It really helps people a lot to enhance visibility. It doesn't have to even be a 5-star review. It can be, a 4 or a 3, but preferably not a 1 or 2, so that everybody has the opportunity to hear about new writers.
I would fully endorse that, and ask people to always write reviews if they've read the book.
Just a sentence or two.
Sentence or two helps
move us up in the algorithm, and that's the thing we're all fighting right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, guys. It's our great pleasure, and I'll be talking to you soon.
Patrick, thank you. Keep writing. Look forward to your next book.
Thank you. You too. Take care. Bye.